This meeting is being recorded.
Welcome to the WPIAL BLITZ show. I'm not entirely sure where all of these sounds are coming from, but I'm Bruce Badgley. There's Ian McMeans, and Ian, we've got a very special guest with us this evening to start the show.
Yes, we do. We're thrilled to have with us head coach Mike Brown from the Hempfield area Spartans. Coach Brown has the Spartans off to a 3-0 start, their first 3-0 start since 2016. And they have a game this week against Shaler where they could go to 4-0, which would be their first 4-0 start since 1971. So really a historic start to the season for Coach Brown. So congratulations. And, how's your team feeling, and how's the community responding to this hot start that you've had?
Yeah, first, thanks for having me. Appreciate all you guys do for high school football. We're excited. We're at a point right now where we're achieving all our goals so far during the season. I know the school especially is very excited to see our success, which, we're pretty excited about it also, where the kids kind of get, that feeling of, the students, the parents, the community, everybody's kind of backing them, which is really cool to see. We talked about playing Shaler this week. We have students from the high school that want to get, buses from the high school and get to the game. We got parents in the booster clubs. They want to start tailgating. So the excitement's there, which is always good to see.
Yeah, that's great, especially after some of the struggles that the program's had recently, in 6A, and you just moved down to 5A this year. I know you haven't started conference play yet, but do you feel like the move down to 5A is going to help your program, be a little bit more competitive once you get into conference play?
Yeah, on paper it looks like that, and then you look at our conference and it,
yeah, they didn't do you any favors there, did they?
Exactly. The only thing we always talk about with that is we don't take as far as bus rides for away games. Talent's still there, and I think that's anywhere in the WPIAL. Whether you move down from 6A to 4A, 3A, 5A, you're still going to have quality competition. We look at it as we just focus on that week who we're playing. We always talk about controlling the controllables, and that's one thing we can't control is our schedule or where we're playing. So whoever's on that schedule for that week, we focus there, and we kind of just keep moving forward there.
Yeah, you've this is what, your third year at Hempfield, Mike?
This is my second
year. So talk
Yep.
a little bit about what you've done. Obviously you're getting the buy-in from the community. Just talk a little bit about what you do on a personal level to kind of get the community involved in your program.
Yeah, so the one big thing that when we got hired as a staff is we made sure that the administration knew that this program was not just going to be a varsity and JV football team. This program was going to be from, our midget program and our youth program all the way up to our alumni. So I kind of used a saying in my interview: we're going to try to affect 6-year-olds to 66-year-olds. They're a part of our program, whether you played or not, whether you even went to Hempfield or not. If you live in the community, you're going to be a part of this program some way, somehow. I think we do a very good job this past off season, being our first off season, is getting our face in front of the youth program, getting our face in the middle schools, elementary schools, showing the kids that we do care, and this is a program where it's not just a team. And I'm a true believer in that, where you see these successful programs all across the WPIAL. Those coaches are doing that. They're getting their coaches down to the youth. Their middle school programs are running their same type of offenses to a degree with the same terminology. So that's one big thing that we made an effort with that. And then with that being said, we also really did try to do a good job of getting our alumni back. We have a lot of successful alumni, whether it's football career or professional career. We wanted to get those guys back as much as possible, and we got lucky this year falling into an anniversary with the 1997 team winning their playoff game, in 97. So they actually got to come back our first home game. So everything's kind of starting to get there where, we got hired kind of late last year. It was late April, and our heads were kind of spinning like, we got to get this done. We got to get that done. So it was nice to have an off season where we can get, a golf outing for everybody to come out. We can get a youth camp. I think we had about 70 kids at the youth camp. So that's the type of stuff we're trying to implement at Hempfield area where, it's not just the high school kids, it's everybody, involved.
Yeah, that's definitely huge. I know last week we talked on the show with Eric Kasperowitz, who's the head coach at Mars now, was at Pine Richland previously. And we'd interviewed him a couple years ago when he was at Pine Richland. And he talked a lot about how, when he was at PR, he went, like you said, down to the middle school level and had the middle school kids running the same offense that he wanted to run in high school. And it was interesting talking to him last week that he just got hired at Mars this year. So, and they'd been a really run heavy program forever. And it was good. Now he wants to come in and install this passing offense. So it was like, how have you gotten that down to the middle school level so far? So I think you're absolutely right. That's really a key to kind of developing that program mode over time in a community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that's the thing too, is the community, the administration, the coaches, they've been great and they've really bought into it, which, I've been really impressed with. But I think the biggest thing is the kids. The kids responded where, they kind of came in last year like, who are these guys? Like and I told them, we kind of picked you didn't pick us. So we kind of had to win that trust with them. So we won that trust with them. The kids been working extremely hard, and I'm glad to see they're getting this success that they deserve.
It's certainly
go ahead,
Bruce. Yeah.
Who are some of the guys that you're going to have to lean on your team to be successful the rest of the year?
Yeah. So the one nice thing that we have, especially this year, is we have a heavy senior loaded class. A lot of the kids played for us last year as juniors, so they got quality experience. But like right now, Jake Phillips, our quarterback, he's been tremendous, throwing the ball and running the ball, which is quite a surprise for us, just how well he's running the ball. But he's a leader. He's everything you want in a quarterback, with a huge arm, but he's also, he takes care of the offense. Perfect example today, our run game, kid messed up. He was the first one. He's almost like a second coach on the field for us. He's doing a great job. But I really, am impressed with Eli Binakonski. He's been playing both ways. He's been kind of our, hybrid safety linebacker type kid. And he also comes in and spills Gino Caesar at running back when Gino gets a little bit tired. He gets a little banged up sometimes. So he's kind of one of the guys that we count on to go, both ways and be that guy where he'll play running back. He'll play what we call an H, which is a tight end. He'll play safety. He'll play linebacker. He pretty much plays all our special teams. So he kind of doesn't come off the field at times. But again, we're at a good spot where, I could probably name, be honest with you, about 8 kids. And it's just, that's how we've been doing. And it's been great where, perfect example, Ian Tufts has a huge game against Latrobe as a wide receiver. Against Greensburg, I know we only played a half, but he really didn't get, targeted that much. So we got guys everywhere that, if they're taking away their run, we can, open with the pass, and, vice versa. So it's very nice to have, a senior oriented team, but also have about 8 guys you can count on.
Go ahead, Ian.
Yeah. And you mentioned Gino Caesar, who's, only put up like almost 400 yards and 11 touchdowns through 3 games. So, yeah, he's definitely run his heart out too. I mean, the kid's been really, really good. So speaking of just how much you guys have scored, at the beginning you mentioned you met your goals. Was one of your goals scoring 49 points every game?
That's what we laughed about that, because I actually was up there with my AD today, and he said he's going to play that number. But It's just, that's how it's been going. And I told them, unless they score 50, I'm cool with 49 every game. So I'll take it. But, and, that's hats off to our offensive staff. They work their tails off, and, they get the kids ready as much as possible. And I think, the kids are starting to believe in, what we do. We kind of have a little bit of different offense on the high school level where we go extremely fast. I know a lot of people got to see Tennessee when they were playing Pitt. It's a very close version of that. And, Coach Ryan Ritz, our offensive coordinator, he's been doing a great job with it.
And talk a little bit about your staff. Obviously, you're offensive coordinator, but, you've only been collectively together for 2 years now. Did you work with these guys previously? Did you develop some chemistry ahead of you working together as a staff?
So Ryan Ritz, Trevor Petrol, our offensive line coach, and Mike Mariotti, our assistant offensive line coach, they all worked at Jeanette High School. Me being a Penn Trafford grad, I always knew of them. I was coaching at Greensburg Central when they were actually at Jeanette, loved what they did. Always was in touch with them. But the real actually reason that most of our guys are together is Ryan's dad, Ray, who used to be the head coach at Jeanette and Latrobe, grew up with my father. So they've known each other probably 40 some years. And Ray's actually my defensive coordinator now. So we're a very close knit coaching staff to the point of not necessarily being on the same staffs, but knowing each other, for a couple, many years. My assistant head coach, Joe Larisha, is one of my brother's closest friends. So I've known him for over 20 some years. My wide receivers coach, Connor Schulteis, his brother and myself worked with each other at Robert Morris. So not too many guys are there that, we haven't known or I haven't known in the past. Ray McKenna, I call him a lifer at Hempfield. He's always been there. But again, I played against him when I was at Penn Trafford, knew of him. So, again, we're not, that staff that has worked together more and less, these 2 years. But again, we've always known each other. We've always been somewhat close with each other, always, either checking in with one another. So, I love my staff. They kind of joke that, I'm getting a lot of guys from the Jeanette area or the Penn Trafford area, but that's just because I've, again, known them on a personal basis. And, my goal was to get the most quality people that I can, there. And I think it's working out great.
So you mentioned, you got some guys from the Jeanette staff. You were at Greensburg Central. All those were 1A programs at the time you moved up to Hempfield, which was a 6A program at the time. What was the biggest adjustment with all you guys moving from 1A programs to a 6A program?
Yeah, I think just the numbers, where, you could have kids playing, one way. You could have, a whole special teams unit. I kind of got a whirlwind going from college down to, high school, to 1A and then coming back up. So it took some adjustments, but I think too, those guys that, they've coached so much where, Ray made the jump from 1A to 5A and now 4A with Latrobe. And then again, having some of the Hempfield guys on the previous staff, I think helped too, because they could give us a sense of, this kid and that kid. Because again, we came in and we didn't really know too much about any of them. We kind of watched the last year's season, but that's really all we had. And, they could give us backgrounds on, families. This kid had a brother that played, and things like that. But I think the biggest adjustment again was just the pure numbers. We always have the arguments and stuff like that about the, athletes, and everybody thinks 1A and all this stuff. Well, we look at it on our team. Eli's one of the best players on our team, and he moved well before we got there from Jeanette to Hempfield. And, again, he's one of our best players. So we really we don't have that much, sense into that. But again, I think the pure numbers of having the JVs teams, and we have a JVB team, and just the pure, depth chart and how deep you can be, took some adjusting.
Wow.
Yeah, I've always, just personally felt that like roster size is the biggest determining factor in, program success, because you can have a school like Aliquippa that's a 1A size school and can win the 4A state title because like they have a sizable roster for, the number of kids they have versus a team like, I don't know, I'll say, Butler, who was a 6A size school, but had a smaller roster than Aliquippa did and was struggling for so long. So,
Exactly.
I think roster size is a huge factor in long-term success.
For sure. Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's great to hear that, you've got a lot of kids coming out for the team too. Cause, we've talked to some other coaches that, have said, in years when their programs have struggled, they have a hard time getting guys to come out. And, like we, Hempfield, you're off to your best start since 2016. So it's been, there was a little bit of a dip there before you guys got there, but it seems like you're heading in the right direction. And really from what I've seen, Hempfield always seemed to have like good players, but it was always kind of like good individual players. It seems like now you really have a good team, that they're all kind of buying into the team mentality and working together for the greater good, which is really cool to see.
Yeah. I mean, again, we preach a lot of things to our kids, but, team being, kind of one of the bigger things that we preach. And, we talk about all the time, there's no one bigger than the program, kind of we talked about. And, there's times, and I tell them, if God forbid, I go down, it's still going to go, the program's bigger than nobody. So again, we kind of use that. And I think the kids really buy into it because again, it gives them a sense, of togetherness, like a brotherhood. And, they've really responded well with it. And, I think we're getting to a point where they're, not afraid, but, they have that in the back of their head of letting their brother down. And I think that's when you kind of make that change in that culture. So it's exciting to see. It's exciting to see them change like that. So, it's been great so far.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's great to hear. Well, congratulations on your success so far this year. Best of luck this week against Shaler. And, hopefully you guys are able to pull out the victory. Shaler's been on a bit of a hot streak here the last couple of weeks too. So it's a kind of cool convergence of storylines of, Shaler had some down years as well, that they, had some long losing streaks. They seem to be kind of on their way back up as well. So nice little game here before you guys get into conference play.
Absolutely. We're excited. We're excited to make the trip, and hopefully it's going to be a good one.
Yeah.
Right. Hey, thanks a lot, Coach. Okay, just go ahead and exit out. And we really appreciate your time.
Thank you. You guys have a great
Take
night.
care. All right.
Thanks.
We'll see you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
See you guys.
All right. Wow. What a great story. I mean, the 49 point game for, we make light of that, but I think that that's a microcosm of their whole season that, that they're able to score like that. But still, there's two things that stood out to me in the interview. One, the senior leadership. Okay, they're an experienced group, but two, and that's why I asked about the coaching staff. These guys knew each other, and wow, what they're doing is taking advantage of like, hey, let's get the band together and see what we can do. And I think that's a great story as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And, Coach Brown didn't say it, but at the time he was hired, he was one of the youngest coaches in the WPIAL. So he really had to, get a lot of buy-in from other coaches, a lot of whom were older than him, which, can be difficult for any professional in any realm, not just football. But, when you have a younger person going into an office environment and they get hired as a assistant manager, whatever it is, of anything, that you start working with people older than you, and you have to get their respect as, being their leader. But I thought it was really cool, not only the senior leadership, but how he talked about how it's really turning into a team mentality. And just looking at their stats, and yes, Geno Caesar scored 11 touchdowns, but they have a bunch of other guys. I mean, they have 6 other guys who have scored touchdowns this season, and through 3 games, I mean, yes, they've scored a lot of points, but like their ability to spread it around and have multiple guys contribute. And it almost reminded me a bit of when we talked with Coach Palco from Mount Lebanon last year. And I mean, he was in his third year, and that was when, you know, they broke through and won the WPIAL title and state title. But talking about, like, you know, getting the buy-in from the team, and that self-sacrificing attitude of, you know, when you stop playing for yourself and start playing for the greater good of the team, that's when special things can happen. And you know, Coach Brown talked about that too, with, you know, not wanting to let your brothers down. Same kind of mentality of, you know, you're all there collectively for the collective good.
Absolutely. All right. Well, great interview there. And boy, there was a lot of great stuff going on last week, Ian. You've got control here. So let's see what's going on.
Yeah. So thanks to all those folks who have tuned in to this week's edition of the WPIAL Blitz show. If you found us, you know, we're on YouTube, the sole source of our show. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, which I am slowly learning how to use.
Yeah, me
And,
too.
and check out our WPIAL articles on steelcityblitz.com. We have games of the week articles and the best WPIAL standings page that you'll find on the internet.
I'll say.
So let's talk a little bit more about Hempfield. You know, we just interviewed their head coach, and, you know, over time, they haven't had the most success of you know, a program. They only have, he mentioned that one playoff victory. They had the 97 team. That's their only playoff win in school history. 3 conference championships, but those all date back to the, you know, the 50s and 60s, from the first decade of the school's existence. And they did make the playoffs 6 times in the decade kind of leading up to the 6th classification era, but haven't made it since 2016. But, you know, seem to be trending back in the right direction, and just moved down from 6A to 5A this year. So, you know, seems like a program on the rise here. I think moving down to 5A will help them, obviously being a conference with defending 5A state champs Penn Trafford, and Gateway, who's a, you know, one of the odds-on favorites this year, is going to be a difficult challenge for them. And on top of that, only 8 teams make the playoffs in 5A this year, so it's going to be a difficult road to hoe. But, you know, this is one of those you know, slow success stories that you start to see, like, okay, you know, well, they had some struggles last year, and now they're getting better this year, and then they get better next year, and then they start to, you know, take those steps and build that program, especially as you get to work down through the youth levels, like he talked about, that, you know, you build up those youth programs, and that's how you build the long-term success of your program.
That's how you reload every year.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. So we did mention their 49 points per game. It's also noteworthy that they only scored 134 points total in the entire season last year. So they've already surpassed that number through 3 weeks. So
That's incredible.
yeah, I thought that was a pretty cool stat. That, you know,
didn't they only win just 2 games last year total as well? So they've already surpassed that too.
Yep. So this year's already more successful than you know, their first season. I feel like first years for head coaches are always tough, especially, you know, when you come into a program that's, you know, had a lot of losing happening, which had happened before Coach Brown took over at Hempfield. You know, it's kind of difficult. You can't turn those kinds of programs around in just 1 year. Those you know, turnaround stories aren't easy. You know, they definitely got some folks from the Jeanette staff when the Jeanette exodus kind of happened, but, you know, that was to Hempfield's benefit too, that you know, those you know, Jeanette's coach was retiring and was in his last year, and Jeanette kind of had an overhaul happening, and Hempfield was the beneficiary of some of the coaches.
Yeah, some win some, lose some, right?
Yep. All right. So one of the other things that we threw out there this week was, if any fans had questions for us to answer on the show, that they could, you know, send them to us. And we got one from our buddy Spencer Lynn on Twitter. Spencer was actually recently inducted into the Bell Vernon Hall of Fame. So congratulations to Spencer on that. So he asked, do you like the 6 classification model, or do you wish the PIAA would go back to 4? I personally wish it would go back to 4. It's hard to keep track of who's in what class because it changes so often. In 6A, WPIAL is strained with just 5 teams. And he acknowledges that, you know, he doesn't think they're ever going back, but it's a fun topic to discuss. So I'll let you answer that one first, Bruce. What do you think, 6 or 4?
Well,
or something else?
I think the 6 classifications is still good. I think the biggest thing is the distribution of the teams in the classifications is probably the single biggest problem the PIAA has, is that there's far too high a concentration of 6A schools in certain areas. And that's what creates the problem, I think, with the 6 classifications, because at a 4A, 3A, 2A, 1A level, I think that there's such a broad competitive balance across the state. It's only in the 6 and 5A now. Maybe it's, you scale back to 5, or reconfigure it. I personally don't think it's ever going to deviate from the 6 classifications, but it is what it is. And we know how you feel about it. You think that it needs to be 4 classifications again, right?
I liked 4. 4 was a nice round even number. So just to back up your point, I pulled up the PIAA's distribution, and like you said, with District 1, you've got 33 schools in 6A and 24 schools in 5A. In District 3, out where you're located, you've got 19 in 6A and 26 in 5A. And really, as you look down the other
there's no other
districts across the
relevancy in those
state.
2 classifications across
Right.
the state.
They're just absolutely loaded between District 1, which is basically the Philly suburbs, and then District 3, kind of the southeastern outside the Philly suburbs region. So yeah, you're right that it is imbalanced, with those 2 districts really dominating, at least numbers wise, 6A and 5A. I think the one other aspect that I think was worth considering, I think I mentioned this on one of our season preview shows as well, that when the PIAA went to 6 classifications, they discussed what they called like a Super 700 class as the top class. So schools with an enrollment number of 700 or above would be in the Super 700 classification, and then they would kind of evenly distribute everyone else. So I'd actually looked at the numbers a month or so ago just to see how that would have split out. So there's 555 schools statewide that play football. And I think there was like 56 of them had 700 or more students, or well, male students, 600 or 700 or more enrollment number, which would mean that if you stuck with 6 classes and had the Super 700 set up, you'd essentially have 100 schools each in 1A through 5A, and then the 55 biggest ones in 6A, which I think probably helps that distribution a little bit. The other option is you could look at something like that for a 5 classification model, that your top one was 700 plus, and then you evenly split up the rest of the teams into 4 classes, and then you got about 125 schools per classification, which distributes pretty well also. So I liked 4. It was a nice round even number. You could play all 4 championship games in one day if you really wanted to, like the WPIAL did at Heinz Field. So the PIAA didn't, but you could have. 4 just split things up more evenly too. 4 was a lot easier to describe to people also. Like when I try and describe to people, like what's a 4A school mean, I'm like, well, they take all the schools and they list them out, and then they take the top 1/6, and those are 6A. They take the next 1/6, and those are 5. That's hard to like conceptualize for people. It seems it's easier to say like, okay, the 25% biggest schools are your quad A schools. The next 20, if you're between the midpoint and 75%, those are the triple A schools, so on and so forth. It's easier to describe. But
you look at the all districts, and you look at the bottom line. There's not, 95, 94, 88, 92, 98, 88. I mean, that's there's not any real classifications that's skewed way out of whack. So it's like how.
Yeah, and some of those numbers,
disproportional. It's disproportional via region, not necessarily by how many schools are in the classification.
Yeah, and some of the numbers are skewed a little bit because teams got bumped up with the success formula and things like that, or opted to play up. So the state does more or less evenly distribute things, to start with, and then teams may opt to play up or get forced up by the success formula or whatever. So yeah, I think 4 I liked a lot. It was easy to describe and distribute, and easier, I think, to schedule. And I think that the challenge with 6 is, looking looking statewide at the distribution, like look at how many 1s and 2s and 3s you see on this chart, that, there's 3 teams in a classification from a given district. Like, it's just, there's so many districts that just have so few number of schools that you're not even playing half of your season. Let's assume you play a week 0 games. You have 10 games. So you need to have at least 6 teams in your class, in your district, for just half of your games to be against teams in your district, in your classification. Like,
Yeah.
there's so much of schedules is taken up by schools that aren't even in your classification in your district, or you have to go play schools from another district just to play someone in the same class as you. So that's where I think some of the challenges with 6. And the other thing with 6 is locally, it broke up a lot of historic rivalries of teams that used to play together. It increased travel time for a lot of schools, because with fewer schools in each classification, it stretched out a lot of the travel times. And the WPIAL, like we've talked about, has done a good job in recent years of trying to structure the non-conference schedule so you get teams that are closer to you, and you can still play some of your historic rivals again. But I think it's it gets to be a little bit difficult when you have that.
And just like you talked about, you just the concentration of the 6A between, the fact that it just is in southeastern Pennsylvania between District 1, District 3, District 11, and District 12. It is not, I mean, it's called a state championship, but it's really the Southeastern Pennsylvania Championship. Now, Mount Lebanon obviously won it from the WPIAL last year, but in theory, it's the Southeastern Pennsylvania Football Championship.
More or less, yeah. I mean, Central Catholics made it to the title game a few times. Pine Richland made it to the title game a few times before they moved down to 5A. But yeah, I mean, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I would think that over, within the 6 classification era, I would venture the guess that, most of a majority, an easy majority of the teams have been from, well, I mean, St. Joe's Prep has been there every year. So, that's 6 teams already, plus Central York made it one year. And someone from District 1, I think, made it one year. So yeah, it's been, yeah. Because there was 2 years where the PIAA had the WPIAL champ playing the District 12 champion in the semifinals instead of in the finals. And I think St. Joe's Prep knocked off Central and Pine Richland in those 2 years in the semis.
Well, it's an interesting argument, that's for sure. We appreciate the question, though. That's what it's all about.
Yep. Thanks, Spencer, and congratulations on your induction into the Bell Vernon Hall of Fame. That's really cool. All right, so let's talk about some key results from this past week. The biggest one was Penn Hills beating Pine Richland. We had a handful of conference games that happened this past week, and Penn Hills and Pine Richland in a 5A Northeast Conference battle. Of the 2 teams that I thought were the top 2 teams in the conference, so this may wind up deciding the conference championship at the end of the season. We may look back and this may be the deciding game. Those 2 teams tied with North Hills for the conference title last year, and with only 8 teams making the playoffs in 5A, every win matters and every loss matters in conference play. So that was a big one for Penn Hills to start off the season. And congratulations to Elwood City on snapping the longest losing streak in the WPIAL. Really cool. Not just snapping the longest losing streak, but doing it by mercy rule over Carlinton. Elwood City had lost 27 straight games dating back to week 9 of 2018 was their last victory. So really cool to see Elwood City, the Wolverines, getting off the schneid. Friend of the show, Dan Bradley's their first-year head coach there. He was at Olsh last year. We had him on the show when Olsh played in the 1A WPIAL title game last year. So congratulations to Coach Bradley and the whole Elwood City community on breaking that 27-game losing streak. Yeah, some other really good games happened this week. Ali Kiski rivalry game between Borough and Valley, 2 neighboring school districts in the New Kensington Borough area. Central Catholic and Bethel Park. This game was closer than the scoreline indicated. Bethel Park took a lead in the fourth quarter. It was, I think, 22-21, and then Central kicked a field goal and I think got an interception return for a touchdown or something to finally win by 9. But this was a lot closer than I expected it to be. So a really, really good performance by a Bethel Park team that went out and beat Mount Lebanon last week. So, maybe Mount Lebanon's not as bad as we were concerned that they might be after they started 0-2, since, they like Bethel gave Central all they could handle. We thought Central was kind of the presumptive favorites in 6A this year. So Bethel's got a really good team. McKeesport and Bell Vernon in an absolute battle. Bobby Boyd, who was our player of the week last week when he scored 3 touchdowns and had 3 interceptions in a win over Penn Trafford, once again was the star of the show against Bell Vernon. He had a rushing touchdown and a pick 6 this week. So Bobby Boyd continuing to just be awesome. And so just have to show this highlight just because of how it ends with this rushing touchdown that he had, 90 some yards with McKeesport backed up against the goal line. And here comes Bobby Boyd through the defense, running through people, running around people, gets his helmet taken off, and still scores a touchdown.
Wow.
Yeah.
Isn't he supposed to be down when they lose their helmet though?
Well,
aren't they supposed to call the play dead when the guy's helmet comes off?
I think so, but they didn't.
They didn't there.
He scored. No.
Wow.
So he's just been incredible all season and what he's done for McKeesport. So,
that's a good throw out there for the fans or any officials that are watching the game is the play dead when the helmet comes off? I think yes, but obviously not. I mean, then all the officials miss that.
Yeah. I'll have to ask my buddy, the ref of Pittsburgh, who's on Twitter. He's a good
He's
dude
a good
on
one.
Twitter.
Yeah,
So,
he is a good one. Yep.
I'll have to tag him in the show and tell him we have a question for him. Some other key results here to talk about. Gateway got all they could handle from North Hills too in an absolute battle. Gateway needed a pick 6 in the fourth quarter to tie the game and then got a late field goal to win it. And Sarah Catholic and Washington went back and forth all night. Sarah Catholic, I owe a bit of an apology to. I had them in my preseason rankings as just a playoff team and not in my championship contender tier. Ooh. And after beating Washington, they are very clearly in that championship contender tier. So my apologies to the Sarah Catholic folks. A couple of them, including their defensive coordinator who we had on the show last year, Coach Keem, kind of let me hear it on Twitter after they beat Washington. Okay. But the trash talk is good. It's all in good fun. We're here for entertainment, and part of the show is us throwing opinions out there, and sometimes our opinions are wrong, and I was wrong in this case. I'm happy to admit it, and if it helps motivate the team, I would gladly take the L on that one, and they can keep using my statement as motivation throughout the rest of the year. So I'm happy to be the motivation for the team if that's what it takes to get them fired up. Couple sizable upsets this week. Cannon McMillan beating Seneca Valley. At the beginning of the year, we kind of thought Seneca Valley was one of the better teams in 6A, and this was a conference game in 6A with 5 6A teams. Only 4 of them make the playoffs, so someone's gonna miss. So every loss kind of matters too. And Cannon Mac had lost to North Allegheny in week 1, and now they beat Seneca Valley. So, we could see some interesting tiebreakers starting to come into play in 6A here, and depending on how things play out the rest of the year, if teams start beating each other. Union beating Cornell. Cornell was the defending conference champions last year in 1A. So Union with a nice win over Cornell. And then Summit Academy, who had the second longest losing streak in the WPIAL, and who hadn't scored a point in their first 2 games, went out and beat Springdale 18-14. So congratulations to the Summit Academy Knights for getting a win. Summit's last victory, I believe, was in 2019. They took the whole 2020 season off. But yeah, really, really cool for Summit getting that win over Springdale. As you'll remember from our season preview, Summit's the school for the
Mhm.
adjudicated youth.
Yep.
So they have complete roster turnover every year, never really know what you're going to get. And, after they got shut out the first 2 weeks, I was kind of like, oh, it's going to be another long season for them. But no, they got a victory. So congratulations to them. Avonworth beating Stowe Rocks in a really a defensive struggle between one of the better teams in 3A and one of the better teams in 2A. So that was cool. And then Olsh beating Clairton in a rematch of their 1A quarterfinal game last year. So
Are you
next
ready?
up,
Are you ready to lower your expectations for Clairton yet this year?
no, I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not. Well, I mean, okay, maybe
They're
maybe
0-3, right?
slightly. They're 0-3, yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right. I didn't have to like look at even the list of there. No, I've seen them, lose 3 games here. Granted, against larger schools, better competition.
right. And that's what I was going to say. They lost
But
to a Westinghouse team that went out and beat Steel High, who was the
All right.
top ranked 1A team in the state. They lost to a Washington team who is one of the best, yes, Washington just lost to Sarah, but Washington is a top 5, top 6 2A school in the WPIAL. So this was their first loss against a WPIAL team, or a WPIAL 1A team, I should say. Sorry, a 1A team. But Olsh went to the championship game last year, only graduated like 5 seniors from their team, and was one of the presumed favorites in 1A this year, along with Bishop Canevin. And Clairton's got a really young team. So, there's some growing pains to go through when you have a young team, especially early in the season. But I think once they get into conference play, I think they'll be okay. And that's going to start this week is when conference play starts. So, and the other thing that Clairton has going for them is right now in their conference, Leechburg is 2-1 and is a really good team. Greensburg Central Catholic is 2-1 and is a really good team. Riverview is 1-2, and they play Clairton this week. And I don't know how good Riverview is. I'm not sure. They're not great. They've been pretty bad recently. So Clairton's 0-3, but the rest of the schools there, you've got Springdale who's 0-3 and just lost to Summit Academy who hadn't scored a point all year. You've got Jeanette who's 0-3 who just lost a game to Jefferson Morgan from the Tri-County South, who was like winless last year or won 1 game last year. It was really bad. And then you've got a Fraser team who hasn't won a game in 2 years, who just moved into the conference. So out of those 4 winless schools, Clairton, Springdale, Jeanette, Fraser, one of them is going to make the playoffs because 4 teams out of that conference are going to make the playoffs.
Because you make the playoffs, doesn't, like I said,
yeah,
I don't know. I mean, I'm not,
I think they're better than Riverview too. So, I mean, that puts them at least as the 3rd best team in the conference. And then, and then you see what happens, with a young team, they get better as the season goes on. And once they get to the playoffs, really, especially in 1A, playoffs are more about being healthy than anything else. Because if you have 1 or 2 key guys get injured, like last year, Clairton was the top seed and had to go play that quarterfinal game against Olsh with like a couple guys injured and a couple guys not available. And, they had a low roster size and, it really hampered them in the game against Olsh, which had a bigger roster, and they got upset. So, I think that as the season goes on, if Clairton is fully healthy, I think they're good enough to be competitive.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So next up, we have our player of the week, and there were a lot of really good performances this week. Yes, our player of the week sponsored by Brood Athletic. It was hard to pick just one player of the week. And, one of the things we always debate on this show is, is it more impressive to have 3 touchdowns in, a big time game against a top-notch opponent in your conference or even in a higher classification, or is it more impressive to score 6 touchdowns against like a team that's terrible. And I think we've always concluded that, the big performances in the big time games are the ones that matter the most. So this week's player of the week is Amir Key, running back from Penn Hills, who in their win over Pine Richland ran for 216 yards and 3 touchdowns, including touchdown runs of 45, 2, and 71 yards. And we have some highlights here from Amir's huddle page. This is, his first touchdown of the game, beginning of the first quarter. You can see, just under 11 minutes on the clock, taking it over the right side and just exploding down the sideline.
What a move in and back out.
Yep. And then later in the game, slicing through the defense like a hot knife through butter, and is just gone. And that 71-yarder wound up being the game deciding touchdown. So that gave sent Pine Richland home losers, but gave Penn Hills the victory. So congratulations to Amir Key, our WPIAL Blitz Show Brute Athletic Player of the Week. And we had a lot of great performances this week, which is why I said, it was hard to choose, right? Cannon McMillan got that big win over Seneca Valley. Their running back, Jake Casper, ran for 150 and 4 touchdowns. Matt Sieg, second time we've seen his name this year, the quarterback from Fort Cherry, 214 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 125 rushing yards and 3 touchdowns. I mean, the kid had over 350 yards almost 350 yards of total offense and 5 touchdowns. Luke Signetti, the running back from Shaler, who Hempfield's going to have to play this week, scored 5 touchdowns in their win over Plum. Julian Dahlem, the quarterback from Upper St. Clair, had 4 passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown. Derek Burke from Deer Lakes, 4 passing touchdowns and a rushing touchdown. Landon Smith, running back from Laurel, 261 rushing yards, 4 touchdowns and a punt return touchdown. And then, all around, Cody Rubrek from Greensburg Salem had a passing touchdown, 2 rushing touchdowns, and a pick 6 on defense. So many good performances this week. It was really hard to choose, but Amir Key, 200 yards and 3 touchdowns against one of the top teams in 5A in Pine Richland, and arguably, one of Penn Hill's biggest threats to repeating as conference champions, gets the nod just for his big time performance in a big time game.
Tough choice, but good choice, I think.
Yes. Congratulations to Amir and the whole
Congratulations,
Penn Hills team.
Amir. Yeah.
Yes.
And we'll be sending the Brute Athletic here your way. And here's our buddy Andrew Cohen. Get Recruited Consulting. Guys, if you're interested at all in playing at the next level, Andrew's got an opportunity to get an evaluation on your film, totally free of charge. Go to the getrecruitedconsulting.com website, submit your film. Andrew will basically give you a call, and after he's done the evaluation with you and your parents, and talk a little bit about your options. There's nothing better out there. It's a very personalized approach to college recruiting. Andrew speaks to coaches personally, and he speaks to all of his clients personally. And if you ever have any questions, you just pick up the phone, and who's going to give you the scoop, and that's Andrew. So Andrew Cohen, Get Recruited Consulting, free film evaluation. Highly recommended you take advantage of that right away. Everybody's got some film out there now, Ian.
Yep. And I try and retweet everyone that tags me in their highlights too, just to try and promote everyone. If it was up to me, everybody would have a chance to, go play college ball somewhere and get some of their education paid for, because not everyone's going to go on to be D1 athletes or go on to the pros. But if you can help get some of your education paid for, that'll benefit you for the rest of your life. So, I like to try and do everything I can to promote any WPIAL player that, wants help getting promoted. So, for those out there watching the show, feel free to keep tagging me in your highlights, and I'll keep retweeting them.
Tag me too. I mean, on the eastern side of the state here, I think very important to get that additional exposure.
Yeah, definitely. So yeah, and thanks to Andrew for all his support of our show. We really appreciate everything he's done to help get the word out about our little YouTube show. So as we just wrapped up week 2, we saw actually 3 of the 5 longest losing streaks in the WPIAL come to an end. So that's pretty cool. You know, anytime you see one of them come to an end, it's exciting, but 3 of them came to an end. 25 teams remain winless. Brownsville, who's playing as an independent now, which is why they don't appear on the list, has lost 22 straight games, which might be the longest streak in the state. I'm not sure. I'll have to ask Dave Micah from EasternPAFootball.com. I know he keeps tabs on all that stuff.
He does. Dave does a great job with that.
Yeah. And on the flip side, 21 remaining undefeated teams. Central Valley and Aliquippa are the only ones with carryover streaks from last season that have carried into this season. And those two teams are playing in a conference together and face each other in week 9. So, you know, we may see a big showdown in week 9 with the 2 longest winning streaks going head to head in Central Valley and Aliquippa.
Yeah, that's going to be wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Buckle up for that one.
Yeah, buckle up. And, you know, it basically means that, you know, they're going to be probably playing again in November. So
probably, although McKeesport and Thomas Jefferson might have something to say about it. So I would say that, you know, whoever wins, assuming they both get there undefeated, whoever wins the Central Valley Aliquippa game would get the number 1 seed in the 4A playoffs. And then if McKeesport keeps doing what they're doing and runs the table through their conference, which would mean beating Thomas Jefferson, but you know, actually since McKeesport moved down to 4A, they've beaten Thomas Jefferson every time they've played them. So, you know, if McKeesport goes undefeated, I think McKeesport's your number 2 seed, and then, you know, probably either TJ or whoever loses the Central Valley Aliquippa games your number 3 seed. And so we also want to give shout outs to new head coaches who got their first win. So we mentioned Dan Bradley at Elwood City. Also Tim Bukowski at Southmoreland. Really nice story here. Southmoreland had appointed Ron Frederick, who had been their offensive line coach, to be their head coach, or I should say was going to appoint. It was on the school board agenda for a motion. And shortly before that meeting happened, like a couple days, Coach Frederick tragically passed away unexpectedly. And so Tim Bukowski, who had been one of the other assistants and was going to be Coach Frederick's assistant head coach, took over the head coaching jobs and now got his first win. So, you know, congratulations to Tim and to the whole Southmoreland community. You know, and I know it's got to be tough for the whole community, the kids, the families, the players, because Coach Frederick was awesome. He was great on Twitter. You know, he always hyped up the team. He was great to interact with. A couple years ago, when my family and I went out to Southmoreland to see a game, like, you know, I messaged him. I was like, hey, like, where would be good to stop and have dinner beforehand? And he's like, oh, these are the good restaurants, or you can like bring a picnic, and, you know, here's a park we really like to go to. So he was awesome. So, you know, he is missed. You know, and our thoughts are with the whole Southmoreland community. And then Ben Hoffer at York getting their first win as well. So, you know, we talked last week about there's 34 new head coaches in the WPIAL this season, and 22 of them have gotten wins so far. So only 12 remaining that haven't won games yet at, you know, the schools that are listed. And a couple of those schools do play each other as the season goes on. So there'll be more opportunities for these new coaches to get some victories as we move forward. Actually, looking at the list here, like Fraser, Jeanette, and Springdale are all in a conference together. So, wow, you know, there'll be some head-to-head games there. So we're moving into week 3. So what does that mean? That means that conferences with 7 teams or 8 teams in them will begin conference play. There's a handful of 5A conferences that have, or conference games that'll be happening, as well as one 6A conference game as well. So that'll be the case for the next couple of weeks. And then finally in week 5, all teams will have conference play. So looking across the WPIAL, everything shaded in yellow here are ones that will be beginning conference play or playing conference games this week, I should say. So really just the Allegheny 6 and the Interstate Conference in 3A are the only ones that we have to wait till week 5 for them to actually start conference play. Everyone else will at least have a couple conference games happening every week from here on out, which is essential for making the playoffs. Sure. Because the conference games are the only ones that matter for playoff qualification. So this is how many teams from each conference will qualify for the playoffs. And that big caveat's in 5A with only 8 teams making it. So you got to finish in the top 2 in your conference to make it. So every loss matters in 5A, you know, and moving down, you know, in 1A, where 4 teams from each conference will make it. Some of those are going to be really tight races, and some of them, like we talked about with the Eastern Conference, where at least right now on paper, even though there haven't been any conference games, you only have two out of the 8 teams with winning records so far. So, it's going to be an exciting season as we move forward, and we'll be tracking all this as we go. You can check out our WPIAL standings page on steelcityblitz.com, as well as, keeping tabs on our show, where we'll have standings breakdowns every week moving forward. So also, as we move into conference play, I wanted to mention, since we love streaks on this show, what are our longest conference streaks that we'll be keeping an eye on? And did I put this on here because my alma mater is North Catholic and they have the longest winning streak? Absolutely, yes, I did. But North Catholic has not lost a conference game since 2018, but they did move up from 3A to 4A this year. So, it's going to be a little bit of a tougher sledding for North Catholic, so we'll see how they do. Central Valley now playing in a conference with Aliquippa, Penn Trafford playing in a conference with Gateway. So, it's and Clairton, who we talked about earlier too. So, a lot of tougher schedules this year for these ones on the winning streak side. And actually, Elizabeth Forward has Bell Vernon in their conference, who moved down from 4A to 3A this year. So should be some challenges for these teams to maintain these winning streaks. And on the flip side, on the conference losing streaks, you see Hempfield and Shaler, they are not in a conference with each other. So while they play each other head to head this week, those streaks will continue because that's a non-conference game. The one I should note, though, is that Ringgold and Ringgold and Connellsville are in a conference together. So they will play each other at some point this year. And one of those streaks will come to an end because Ringgold and Connellsville will play a head-to-head game.
Here they go.
Yep. All right. So our games of the week this week, what do we have on tap here? The only 6A conference game, Mount Lebanon taking on Central Catholic. That's a big one for both teams, maybe more so for Mount Lebanon in a rematch of last year's WPIAL championship game. Mount Lebanon ended their very short 2-game losing streak by throttling Moon this past week. So Lebo getting back to their winning ways and now get their first conference test of the season. In 5A, 2 matchups that I really think could potentially at the end of the year, determine which teams get into the playoffs and which teams don't. Teams in that, like we said, only the top 2 are guaranteed spots, and then 2 out of the 3 third place teams will get in. So, these are teams I think are right in that range of, second, third, fourth place in their conference. So these games both, even though North Hills is off to an 0-3 start, they gave Gateway everything they could handle this week. And, are now playing a Woodland Hills team who's in their conference. And, both of those teams are going to be right in the mix, or should be right in the mix, for the playoff race
at the mouth.
Yeah. Yep. And South Fayette and Pierce Township as well, both off to good starts this year. North Catholic puts their longest conference winning streak in the WPIAL on the line against Highlands, who's off to a 3-0 start. And then McKeesport, who we've talked about with Bobby Boyd, taking on Laurel Highlands, who has Rodney Gallagher, who's a West Virginia commit, one of the most exciting players in the WPIAL with the ball in his hand. So two really good, highlight reel players going head to head. Laurel Highlands started the year with Gallagher at wide receiver, and then in the second game against Bell Vernon, they moved him back to quarterback, which is where he played last year. And he stayed there last week as well at quarterback, and threw for over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns, and also ran for 70 yards and 2 touchdowns, I think. So, so they need to keep Rodney Gallagher at quarterback. They tried the experiment of putting him at wide receiver because that's where he's going to play in college. He's also a really good defensive back and a really good basketball player. So the kid's just an all-around great athlete. But yeah, that should be a really good game in the 4A Big 7 conference. Beaver taking on South Park in a 3A game that I think is a good matchup of teams kind of in the middle of the conference that may eventually determine who makes the playoffs and who doesn't. Burrell and Sarah Catholic, like I said, Sarah is absolutely a championship contender in 2A. Burrell off to a hot 3-0 start after winning just 3 games total last season. So congratulations to the Burrell Bucks, but they're going to be up against Sarah Catholic in their defense. And then another battle of undefeated teams with Neshannock taking on Western Beaver on Saturday afternoon. And then moving down to 1A, a couple games like a lot of these between teams that I think are going to be kind of in the middle of the pack in their conferences. And, these games could down the line be important matchups for who makes the playoffs and who doesn't. So
Yeah.
a lot of meaningful games here coming up in week 3 that, 6 weeks from now, when we're in week 9, we might say, hey, that week 3 game that whoever won determined who made the playoffs.
Yeah.
So thanks to everyone for tuning in. We really appreciate it. And you know where to find us. Find us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and all of our articles on steelcityblitz.com that break down all of our games of the week, as well as our WPIAL standings page.
I'm going to have to watch that last segment again, my own self here. I'm like, scratching my head on all of that stuff. But no, you're right. Look, I still have enormous heartburn over the fact that not every one of the games is a determining factor technically in getting these teams to the postseason. It is basically from this point forward for the teams and the conference schedule, correct?
It is, yes. Yeah, it is just conference games that get you in. That being said, last year, I think I figured out how the District 3 formula works, and I ran it for the WPIAL, and basically I think there was only like 1 or 2 teams at the very bottom that it actually would have changed their playoff status, like whether making it or not. So on the whole, let's say 16 teams make it. If you get 14 out of 16 the same either way, your top teams are your top teams. And I know District 3 does their playoff seeding based on the power rankings formula, whereas the WPIAL does the playoff seeding by committee. So there is a little bit more, it's almost more like the NCAA tournament that, you have a selection committee and they look at everything and take things into account and, try and organize teams in the bracket in the best way possible. And I'll be honest with you, they've done some creative things over time. Because they've done things that they've called inverted seating before, and or they've tried to spread teams out on the bracket so that that let's take Central Valley and Aliquippa, right? That, they might put them as like the 1 seed and the 3 seed just so they wouldn't play each other potentially till the championship game,
right?
Or something like that. So, would that mean that the second place team from a conference might get a higher seed than the first place team from another conference? Yes, but do they deserve it? Probably.
Ultimately, they have to beat everybody to get out of district.
Exactly. You gotta win the games on the field anyways. And the best teams are usually the ones that rise to the top. I mean, it's never a mistake that a team that wins a WPIAL title. It's a challenge to do it.
Yeah, that's correct. All right, my man. I'll tell you what, each week goes by. Look, it's halfway through the season time next week. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, if you count week 0, we'll be, 4 games in. Yeah, this is flying by. Yeah,
I can't believe how fast it's gone. I think it's because there's so much everything is really under the microscope just because of that we've had an off season that everybody has just been looking forward to this season. I think, because we're back to relative normalcy in how people can attend games, watch games, how players can play in games, coaches can coach in games. It's very much back to normal, right?
Yeah. We haven't had any games canceled yet this year. Well, actually, there were 2, but that was from Mohawk being subjected to having the hazing investigation. So they canceled their games because they were under investigation. Which was a good reason. So
then they come back out and beat Mars last week, right?
No, that was Blackhawk.
Or Blackhawk.
Blackhawk beat Mars. That actually probably could have been my upset of the week too.
Yeah. Wow.
But no, Mohawk lost to Laurel 49-7. Yeah. Okay. But yeah, so
Mohawk,
those were the only
Blackhawk,
games canceled. this year. Yeah, actually, I think they're neighboring school districts too. So, you know, um, but because Mohawk's like southwestern Lawrence County, and then Blackhawk is like northwestern Beaver County. So yeah,
That win over Mars area was, to me, I mean, that floored me last week. Any other games kind of floor you like that one?
The Summit Springdale game was kind of a shocker to me. That one really opened my eyes. I, I don't know if any of the other ones really surprised me.
Okay.
I think Cannon Mac, I knew Cannon Mac was a good team. And I kind of felt sorry for them. That I was like, oh man, they're going to get like the short end of the stick because they're like a good quality team. And there's 5 teams in 6A and only 4 of them are going to make the playoffs. But that was a real statement victory they had over a really good Seneca Valley team. So yeah, I think there's definitely a lot of good teams out there, and as they start to find their way through conference play, the cream will rise to the top, and we'll see who's who, and it's going to be exciting. And I do have to say the real shock of the weekend, let's not lie about it, was the Steelers beating the Bengals, because holy cow, did that game take years off my life. I could not believe the way that game ended.
How right, and after the kicker missed one, he had another opportunity there on the last play of overtime to win it, and he did. That just, to me, is like, it's hard for me to imagine that he was going to get an opportunity for redemption, but he did.
He did. And hey, special teams matter, and everyone matters, right? The Bengals long snapper got hurt, and on the game-winning extra point at the end of the game, the snap was slow and bad, and the Steelers blocked it. And then in overtime, it was another bad snap. So everybody talks about the kickers, but the whole operation, the snap, the hold, everyone matters. And then your Bears got a somewhat surprising victory too over the 49ers. So how about that? We're all winners this weekend.
It really didn't look very promising to start, but I'll tell you what, you got to give them, look, it's the dramatic overreaction is always week 1 NFL. Everybody's like, oh, we have a great team, or oh, our team stinks. It's everybody just like overreacts. It is a marathon now in pro football rather than a sprint. And just take the first week with a grain of salt.
Yeah, but for the Steelers,
it's always nice to win, though.
Oh yeah, it is. And for the Steelers, who got absolutely trounced twice by the Bengals last year, there was a little bit, and the Bengals were defending AFC champions, so it was.
And they kind of gave it away in the first half, really. I mean,
well, yeah, but it was just an all around thrilling performance, and you don't expect to have that much of a roller coaster ride in week 1, but that was something. So
yeah.
And for anyone else listening out there that enjoys hearing me talk about football, I also have a Steelers podcast. It's the Steel City Blitz podcast. So you can check that out on YouTube or any other podcast platform. We do a video thing too, so the videos are on YouTube, or you can check out the podcast on Spotify or Apple or Google podcasts or whatever. So yeah, thanks for tuning into the WPIAL Blitz show, and you can also check out the Steel City Blitz podcast and check out the steelcityblitz.com website for all of our WPIAL coverage as well as Steelers coverage.
And don't forget the Fresh Set of Downs podcast covers the eastern part of the state, and we actually did talk about some WPIAL teams this week. So we're not void of the fact that there's another half of the state that ultimately it comes together there. But it's a lot of fun. Ian, thank you very much. It's a blast, and like I said, this is the show for all the football geeks in Pennsylvania. So for my buddy Ian, I'm Bruce Badger. Hey, listen, thanks for watching another WPIAL Blitz Show podcast. We'll be back again next week. Take care now.